You know, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Wiccan, it don't matter to a horror film. You're all fair game. We're going to talk about it on the Horror Movie Syllabus. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. I'm Professor Victor and I'll be your host as we're talking about all of the essential, must-see, noteworthy modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend checking out the intro video as it'll give you a good idea about what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus and how these things work. There's a link to it in the description below. But what you need to know for right now is that we take a particular subgenre and then select 3 films to be noteworthy representations of that subgenre. And today the subgenre we're talking about is religious horror films. Now if you've looked closely at the Horror Movie Syllabus, which can be found at horrormoviesyllabus.com, you'll see that in addition to the subgenre of religion, I also have subgenres for possession films and cult films. The reason I did this was to allow us to talk about religious horror films that aren't about possession, since pretty much every possession film has a religious angle to it, and it's usually a Christian angle. And cult movies seem to be kind of their own beast, so I felt like they deserved their own subgenre. But if I'm being honest, I just really like religious horror films, so I wanted to find a way to get more of them on the syllabus. So multiple subgenres that kind of deal with similar types of movies seem like a good idea. One of the reasons I like religious horror films is because it focuses on our beliefs. It really challenges us on our beliefs. I believe that the success of a good horror film depends on what you believe. For example, if you believe in ghosts, movies about ghosts would be more likely to be scary to you. If you believe in aliens, movies about aliens are probably more scary to you. Religious horror films are particularly interesting because they aren't just dependent on what you believe, but they are about what you believe as well. I really like that meta aspect of it. I also like that they both challenge and reaffirm your faith at the same time. That's kind of a neat trick for a horror movie to pull off. Now, frequent visitors to the Horror Movie Syllabus know that we like to separate these movies into 3 major categories: undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate films. In this case, that order is going to delineate the order of complexity that I find these films to be, with the undergraduate film being maybe the least complex film and the postgraduate film being the most complex. Okay, the first film we're going to talk about today is The Serpent and the Rainbow. Now, The Serpent and the Rainbow came out in 1988, and it is an interesting film because it purports to be based on a true story. Now, I know that a lot of horror films actually say that they're based on a true story, and most of that is nonsense, but this was based on a non-fiction book. The book and the movie is about a man going to Haiti to find a drug that apparently puts people into zombie-like states. The idea being that he can sell this drug to a pharmaceutical company. Of course, he finds more than he bargained for there, and there is a lot of intertwining of voodoo religion in the film, and that's where the movie is at its strongest, in my opinion. The depictions of voodoo religion are pretty accurate from what I know. Bear in mind, I'm not an expert on voodoo, but I have done a little bit of reading on it, and it seems like it's a pretty fair representation of it for a horror film. It's not a documentary, let's be clear about that. And that's something that I want to mention about this film is while it's supposedly based on a true story, the truth of it is something for debate. If you guys decide to check it out, let me know in the comments below if you think it's a true story or if you have some questions about its veracity. I have some veracity questions about it. Now, it's worth noting that when this movie came out, the fact that it was supposedly based on a true story made it very controversial. I remember seeing the commercials for this and all the buzz and hype around it being super duper controversial. So when I finally saw it, which was on home video, I never saw it in the theaters, I was a little disappointed because it does not live up to the controversial aspect of that at all. It is a good movie, don't get me wrong, and it's an interesting telling of this supposedly true story, and it's kind of interesting to determine where the facts are in the movie and where maybe they've taken some artistic license. But it is not tremendously scary, and it is not a particularly complicated or difficult movie. I think in the late 80s, the voodoo aspect of it might have been something that added to the controversy of things, at least in America, because that's where I remember the controversy being. I don't really know if it was worldwide controversy. In any event, if you're looking for a real controversial, edgy film, I don't think you're going to get that from this. But if you're looking for a really interesting take on a zombie film, this one will deliver the goods. Our second film, the graduate level selection for the religious horror films, is Angel Heart. Now, I love Angel Heart. I love it. I can't even tell you how much I love it. Or maybe I can. Let me explain. Back in college, I had a poster of Mickey Rourke, the star of Angel Heart, a black and white poster of him from this movie on my dorm room wall. Now, I know that's probably not that big a deal. Lots of people have movie posters on their college dorm room walls. But after I left college and got a real apartment, I framed that poster and I had that in my living room of my apartment for a long time because I love Mickey Rourke and I love Angel Heart. If you're not familiar with Angel Heart, it tells the story of Harry Angel, a 1950s private detective who gets hired by a mysterious client to find a missing person who has a contract that is unfulfilled. Harry's investigation leads him to New Orleans, where he encounters some voodoo practitioners, which again leads to the voodoo religion being represented in the horror movie syllabus today. To tell you more about the plot of the movie would be spoiling it, and I couldn't possibly bring myself to do that because it's just too good. That said, I would be curious, for those of you that have seen it fairly recently, or for those of you that watch it after this video, I'd be curious to know if you found the twists in the movie to be obvious. I can't say because I don't have perspective on it. Back in the day, I definitely found the surprises to be surprising. But, 30 some odd years later, we've seen a lot of movies with a lot of surprises. So I don't know if this movie's a lot more predictable now than it might have been back in 1987. So I'd be curious to know your perspective on that. Did you guess what was going to happen in the movie? Let us know in the comments below. Now, this movie had some controversy as well when it came out. In this case, primarily because of co-star Lisa Bonet. Lisa Bonet was at the time in a family sitcom called The Cosby Show, which starred Bill Cosby back when he was known for being America's lovable comedian and not the rapist that he's known for today. Anyways, Lisa Bonet has a pretty intense sex scene in the film, which again, by today's standards, probably not that intense, but in 1987, pretty intense. And there was a lot of controversy about that at the time. I remember the movie was being threatened with not getting a R rating, and they actually wound up having to cut out a few scenes or a few frames of a scene in order to get the R rating. I've seen the unrated footage, and yeah, man, like 1987, we were a little bit more uptight, I guess, about sex than we are now, which is saying something, I suppose. In any event, Angel Heart also probably not nearly as controversial as its reputation might lead you to believe, but it is an incredibly well-made movie. It's really, really well done. I find it really interesting. The acting performances across the board are exceptional. I love this film. I may be a little biased about this film, but I'll take the challenge on that. I think that it's excellent. I think you guys will really like it. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Let me know what you think. And the last movie we're going to talk about today for the religious horror films, our postgraduate level film, Mother. Oh, Mother. Mother is one divisive, controversial film for real. Mother came out just a few years ago. It's directed by film auteur Darren Aronofsky, a director that I am a big fan of. It stars superstar Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem, and it is a very complicated and interesting movie. That's probably the polite way of putting it. If you don't know, the movie is an allegory for creation and the Bible. Jennifer Lawrence representing Mother Earth and Javier Bardem representing God. And there's also representations of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and the flood from Noah's Ark. It's a big Christian allegory. Some people might think that's a spoiler for the film, but I think you are better off knowing that going in because I think you're more likely to appreciate the film if you understand that it's allegorical in nature. Because if you try to take it at face value as a straight ahead narrative, you will struggle. The movie is not really a story so much as it is an allegory or really a nightmare. Sarah Hawkinson in her horror movie channel, Possessed by Horror, gives a pretty good explanation of this. The unsettling nature of the movie, both in sound design and in imagery, it really does come off as a nightmare. I'll link to Sarah's video in the description below because I think she gives a pretty good accounting of how this movie can make you feel. I think that also lends itself to the controversy of the movie, it's a deeply unsettling film with some incredibly unsettling imagery in it. I don't want to spoil anything anymore that I may have already spoiled. I won't tell you some of that imagery, but it is nightmarish. That is really the word that I would use for it. It really is unsettling. That said, I love the film. I think that the unsettling nightmare aspect works incredibly well. It's very, very effective. The sound design alone is deeply unnerving. I also like the allegorical nature of it. I think it's clever. I think it's fun. I personally also think there's a dual allegorical nature of it because the relationship between Jennifer Lawrence's character and Javier Bardem's character is interesting as he starts catering to his fans and she feels a little overshadowed or neglected as a result. It's worth mentioning that Aronofsky was dating Jennifer Lawrence at the time, and she is a much, much bigger star than he is. So I kind of think that this movie also acts as an allegory of what it's like to date Jennifer Lawrence. And in that sense, it kind of adds an extra layer of fun to the movie. But I think it's an incredibly well made film. I think it's beautifully shot, beautifully directed, wonderfully acted. I am in the minority on this opinion. Critics liked this film quite a bit, fans not so much. A lot of people hate this film. And I can maybe understand why. So it's a divisive film. I would be very interested in seeing what you guys think of it. If you've seen Mother and you have a strong opinion of it, let's hear about it in the description below. And if you haven't seen Mother, check it out and let us know what you think. But be forewarned, it's a bit much. It's a complicated, nightmarish, unsettling, gruesome, brilliant, beautiful. It's Mother. So that's going to do it for our exploration of the religious horror films. But as usual, I like to leave a few extra credit films for you guys. The first one we're going to talk about is a movie called The Rapture. Now, The Rapture is arguably more of a drama than a horror film. I'm putting it here because A, I love it, and B, because the concept of the rapture is really horrific to me. It's about a woman who suffers some tragedy in her life, gets deeply religious, and decides to take her daughter out to the desert and wait for the rapture. There is some very unsettling things that happen in this movie. So while it is really more of a drama than a horror film, there's some stuff there that I think definitely qualifies as horror. I don't think this movie's for everybody, but if you do check it out, let me know what you think because I really like this movie and I would like to know if there's anybody else out there who really likes it as well. The next movie I'm going to recommend is Stigmata. Stigmata is kind of a trashy horror film, really. It's one of those 90s horror films and it's got that 90s editing sensibility in it, but I just love it. It's fun. It stars Patricia Arquette and she's good in the movie, and it's not terribly complex, but it's a good time. It's a good ride. Check it out if you haven't checked it out. It's pretty good. And the last movie that I'm going to recommend is The Prophecy. The Prophecy is a movie about the war in heaven between the good angels and the fallen angels. It is kind of ridiculous, but I love it anyways. It's got some really over-the-top fun performances, particularly by star Christopher Walken, the infamous Christopher Walken. He's just chewing up scenery in this movie. And it's got just kind of a cool factor to it, at least maybe a dated cool factor by today's standards, but it was just kind of cool at the time. And it spawned off a billion sequels. I don't even know how many sequels there were. There's a lot, but and they get progressively cheesier and cheesier. But it's just a fun time. If you're interested in things like The War in Heaven or Angels, and if you like shows like Lucifer or Supernatural, you might check this movie out. It's pretty fun. I like this one, so I couldn't help but recommend it as an extra credit film. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap this session up. Go ahead and leave us some comments on your thoughts about movies that should have been represented here in this video. Just be aware that other movies that would qualify as religious horror movies might be popping up in other subgenres as well. For example, if you were looking for, say, The Omen and thinking it would be here, it's probably somewhere else on the horror movie syllabus. Leave me a comment down below if you can figure out which subgenre it's going to wind up being in. Let me know what other movies I've missed and you think should be in here, or what other subgenres you think I might have put them into. I'm very curious to see what you guys come up with. That's all for now. Class dismissed.